picture's a hit, everybody says they know the reason it was a hit. And so I did have a lot of different people saying, you have to have this in the movie. The studio was like, you have to have the love affair. And Mel Brooks was saying, you've got to have more blood and you've got to have somebody's face ripped off. One level was a juggling act. You know, I did need to appease the powers that be at the time. Fly One was a huge success, made a lot of money. Fox was happy, Mel Brooks was happy, there were a lot of happy people around, and so they immediately announced that they'd put a sequel in the works. I had gotten the Academy Award for makeup with Stéphane Zupuy on the show, and on Fly One, which is it should be The Fly, but I call it Fly One now. Anyway, on Fly One, I got working very closely with not only the director, David Cronenberg, but also the producer, Stuart Kornfeld. I had a lot of input on a lot of different aspects of Fly One, including some of the lighting and some of the production design in very minimal ways, but enough that Stuart felt that I had some real promise. And he said, Chris, so you want to direct Fly 2, don't you? I said, well, I hadn't really thought about it, but I guess, I don't know. He said, well, because I just put your name in. I think they're going to go for it. And I'm like, So it was great up front working with Stuart Kornfeld because Stuart's a very creative producer, and he's very supportive, got a lot of ideas. He's very active creatively. Stuart had an offer on another project, and he left the picture, and that's when Stephen Charles Jaffe came in.
I got a call from Stuart Kornfeld, who had produced Fly One, and he asked me if I liked The Fly, the first one, and I said, yeah, I loved it. And he said, would I be interested in producing the sequel? And I said, absolutely. So I came in, I met Stuart, and we got along, and then he introduced me to Mel, and we got along, and that was quite interesting because I'd only known Mel Brooks as an actor and a comedian and, as a writer. He told me it was Chris's first movie as a director, that Chris had done the effects on the first one, and I knew he had. I knew who Chris was as a special effects makeup artist. I was impressed with the fact that, first of all, in his position doing special effects makeup, he'd worked with some amazing directors, including David Cronenberg, and I knew that for him to have the reputation he did as a really great professional in his field, he had to be prepared. He had to have contingency plans. He had to have backup plans. The difficulty on this movie was that if things didn't go right with the puppetry and the makeup, there wasn't a lot you could cut out to pick up your schedule. And, this was something that Mel and I had discussed going into the project.
And Stephen Charles Jaffe he's a great guy, really great guy, and brought up in the industry, and he's very gentle with first-time directors. He was really great.
I never shied away from working with first-time directors. Everybody has to be a first-time director at some point or another. And I met Chris, got along with him very well, and got into the whole minutia of what would be involved in creating this creature.
The script was a major boondoggle going into the project. What had happened with the movie was that it wasn't really on a tight schedule for production or anything like that. Fox had another project drop out, and then Fly 2 got thrown into the release slot, so suddenly it was a picture that had to start going really fast. And that's when I got on the picture. Now, what had happened previous to that was that Mick Garris had done a script on it, which was a very sort of family-oriented, more of I won't say a kid's film, but it's a relationship between a kid and this bug monster, basically, which had its interesting aspects. That script had already been long abandoned by the time I got called in. I came in when Jim and Ken Wheat, I think, had just been hired. I'm not sure. I was not really involved in that selection whatsoever. But I met with them immediately, and they went ahead, and they, they're seasoned professionals as well. They sort of knew what they, what they had gotten landed in, and so they basically wound up having to go through and come up with a script that addressed the committee's desires. So here I was, getting close to getting ready to go into pre-production on this with a script that I didn't know how to turn into a movie. So I went into the executives and I said, "Look, guys, if you're asking, if this is the script you want to turn into a film, you have to get somebody else because I can't do it." And I basically, I would say I walked off the film, but they didn't let me get out of the office. They said, whoa, wait. And they were great, and they said, well, what do you want? What do you need? And I said, well, I need something with, that's got some more tug and pull and higher gothic drama to it. And so they said, well, who do you want on this? And I had read Frank Darabont's Blob script and really liked it. And Frank wasn't established then as a fantastic filmmaker as he is. And so the vice president in that meeting just said, okay, get me Frank Darabont on the phone, real Hollywood style stuff. It was great.
We originally were planning to film the sequel to The Fly in Toronto, where the original was done, and there was no stage big enough for our sets, and the only stage in North America that could accommodate our hero set was in Vancouver at the Bridge Studios.
We shot at a place called the Bridge, which is a huge, gigantic, long building. It's basically at that time, was a big non-soundproofed, dirt-floored barn next to the railroad tracks.
It was huge, and we used every inch of that. I mean, we built right to the roof, and it was really meant for special effects work, not for sound work.
So we had a couple of those issues to try and deal with as we got into the show, which include laying cement flooring for sets and all kind of stuff. My travels were up to CWI as often as I could, but I'd also be getting tapes sent to me in terms of design work, things like that. The hardest aspect of the entire picture was not being in charge of the special effects. It was funny because most of my crew went, "Oh, this is going to be great, Chris is going to let us, we won't get the usual harassment, difficult time."
Now you'll notice that this man from Venus came to our display area in 1949. United States government.
The one guy in the crew was like going, "Give me a break, you kidding? He knows what we're trying to get away with." So, and he was right. It was a tough show technically, but because it was just an incredibly great crew everywhere, here in LA, up there, at CWI, Vancouver, it was wonderful. It really made it all doable. Casting was a thing I didn't know what was going on, because we started casting and I had a list of actors and actresses that I wanted to look at and interview, which I did, and my first choice had always been Vince D'Onofrio, who I really thought was great and just would be perfect for the role. The studio said, "Okay, fine, we'll do let's do some tests." So we shot film tests on him, and I just got back, no. Debbie Lucchese, who cast the movie, sort of talked to somebody else who knew somebody else, kind of thing, and we finally came up with Eric Stoltz's name. But I said, great, let's try it. I'll talk to him. So went out and had dinner with him, and we were very honestly, he asked me, he said, "So Chris, why do you want me in the movie?" And I said, "Because I think it's the only way I'm going to get this movie done. But let me ask you a question. Why the hell would you want to go through all the makeup stuff again?" And he said, "Well, it is what it is." So he got paid and I got to make the movie.
When Eric took the role and, knew this was something that would be a daily occurrence once he became the Fly, I sat with him for quite a while also, because it's a horribly boring thing for an actor to go through.
I can see so much better now. Beth, if you stay a while, I'll show you a magic trick.
And once we had him, I got assigned Daphne Zuniga. It was literally the next, or no, I think it was that same day that they kind of said, yeah, we'll go with Eric. I got a call and said, and I think it was Mel Brooks saying, okay, you're going to use Daphne Zuniga. And because he had used her on Spaceballs and really liked her.
We were a little uncertain at first because I don't know that we'd seen anything else of her work. And looking at her in Spaceballs, which was, a totally different movie, it was hard to kind of say, yeah, okay. But she came in and read and was fantastic, and we cast her. That was it.
Richardson was Debbie Lucchese's casting director's suggestion, and he was wonderful, wonderful actor, extremely professional, had a great sense of humor. He was always joking about stuff on the set.
Happy birthday, Martin.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, blow out the candles. Don't forget to make a wish.
John Getz was great. He was a lot of fun. Very relaxed kind of guy. Came back and said, "Well, Chris, let's I'm happy to do it, but can we go somewhere with the character? Can we take it to the next level?" My favorite thing with him is don't sit in that chair when they come in there, because there's no explanation about it. He just kind of said, "Well, Chris, can I get away with it?" I said, "Yeah, do it. That's great. That's fun." I don't think anybody picks up on it or anything, but it sets off his eccentricity right away as you get in there.
Don't sit there.
I had a conversation with Gina about coming back for the film, and she said, "Chris, I'd love to do it. I have no problems coming back. I'd love to help. I'd love to be a part of it. I just don't want to do a birth scene." I don't know whether she had read the script. I don't think she had, but she had serious problems with the birth scene in Fly 1. It was emotionally upsetting for her, and it was just one of those things that really affected her. And she just said, "Chris, I'll do anything you want. I can't do a birth scene, please." So she was great about it, but I was sort of stuck up a tree with that one.
Oh my God! There's something wrong! I can feel it!
Now stop screaming, take a deep breath, and...
I went up to Vancouver to look for a local production designer, and there were sort of 3 name production designers available at the time. But then Michael Bolton walked through the door, and Michael's, you gotta meet him. He's just a big, goofy sweetheart of a guy.
He knew the first movie and loved it, and he just, kind of rolled up his sleeves and said, "What do you guys want?" And, Chris told him, and he built it. And he had the best crew I've ever worked with. They were fantastic. They did this amazing set. I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it was the biggest set ever built on that specific stage.
And I should say that the Dog's Pen, I can't believe no one brings this up in this high-tech place where everything's, clean cement. We have this dripping, scummy, archaic, medieval pit with straw thrown. It's a sewer. And nobody ever said, "No, that doesn't fit." It's emotionally the right thing. And I remember when we did that set, and I told him, I said, "No, the top is the beautiful, real-world area, the high-tech, everybody's happy, and they look in, and it's living hell, It's got to be. It is a dungeon." And I was really happy with the way that looked. I was just really thrilled. The DP was a real concern for me because obviously it's the look of the film, and I'd worked with a lot of really good DPs as an effects man, so I really appreciated what went into it and the kind of personality as well that it took to really get through it all. I had no idea what kind of director I was really going to be because I hadn't done it before. So Robin had done the Hellraiser movies, which I really, for a low-budget picture, I really liked the look of, and I could tell that this guy knew what he was doing and how to get the most out of a given situation. He was an absolute savior of the entire production because he was not only so professional, but had such a wonderful sense of fun about everything. The whole crew was just incredible. It was one of the most enjoyable productions I've ever been on in any capacity, just for the sense of family that the crew had. I mean, the crew chipped in and bought a pool and set a pool outside the studio. We brought in, I don't know, a few tons of sand and put sand around it and set up a beach for the end of the day.
So we had something called Electric Beach. It was called Electric Beach because the electricians and the gaffer, pulled this thing together. And it really worked well because, anytime Chris and I needed a favor from the crew, there was no, hemming and hawing. They just did it.
Directing actors was the thing that I knew the absolute least at that point. It was challenging for me because Eric works in one very specific style. He was into character. He wanted to be called by the character's name. He had Martin on the back of his chair. Daphne was brighter, cheerier, in character when she needed to be, out laughing with the crew somewhere else when she didn't need to be. So it was fortunate for me that they both knew what they were doing. Because otherwise I don't know that I could have gotten them through the show. There were a lot of wonderfully experienced actors and actresses on the show, which was really great. Emery Lee was really great to work with. She's very professional, very exacting actress. And Robin and I used to, we were in love with her, just totally in love with her, because she's just this tiny little lady, but just full of energy and life. And we used to challenge her all the time in the shots. Gary Chalk, who played Scorby, I didn't know it at the time I hired him, was actually known in Vancouver as a comedian. And a lot of the local people were kind of like concerned, like, going, this is an awfully serious role for Gary. And they were very hesitant about it. I never had a question because Gary was great. Casting the kids was really hard. It was really difficult because we assumed that we'd be able to find somebody in Vancouver. And there weren't a lot of kid actors there at the time. Harley Cross emerged, basically, as the option. He was a little bit testing the water when he got there to see what he could and couldn't get away with.
I've got this disease. So rare, there's only been 2 people who've ever had it. My father, and now me.
I think he only had trouble with one scene where he had that long speech where he's sitting with the dog. And he loved hanging around the set. So I was very fortunate that I got him, because I think had I actually had to use some of the other choices that I had made, I would have struggled a lot more on the set with him. Matthew Moore, who played Baby Eric, we called him, very, very cute kid with the attention span of about a 30th of a second. It was the biggest challenge, was just to get him even pointed in the same direction for more than like 3 seconds. Lee did great. We had trouble. We did a good number of takes between he and Lee. But Lee was very good, finally started really getting his attention. And you can see in the movie where he's Matthew's wandering in one shot, but then for all his close-ups, Matthew's talking to me. The dog issue was one of the biggest issues that went through the entire thread of making the picture, because when Frank came up with the script, I ran, Frank, you kill a dog. And even Mel Brooks was going, you can't kill a dog. You can't kill a dog in a movie, And Frank going, no, you got to kill the dog. And, I realized he was absolutely right. So the dog had to be the sweetest dog in the world. And the dog got everything right on the first take, and everybody else was still rehearsing. So he was wonderful, and then we had to basically destroy him. That was a consideration that I wasn't sure about, and that was one that we had trouble at CWI coming up with, because if we made the dog too recognizable, it really was going to be difficult. So it had to be over the top, and it was John Berg who came up with the design for the mutated dog, and CWI, I hope the crew will someday forgive me, but they went to great pains to build, I think it was 3 puppets for that gag, and built full armatures, mechanical rod puppets that were very hefty and strong. And literally when we got up there, and this was, I don't know, maybe even a week before we were shooting the scene, I just kind of went, there's something wrong. This mutated dog looks too healthy. He looks too vibrant. I mean, he needs to look like he's helpless and in pain. My crew was like looking at me, drumming their fingers, going, "Yes, boss, of course, boss, you're right, boss." And so what they had to do was literally go in and rip all the guts out of the puppet, and it's literally a rag doll hand puppet with a couple of rods on it in the movie, an emergency maneuver there. But I just wanted that really pathetic, inability of the animal to really function well. It was an interesting moment on the set when we shot the demise of the dog, because normally you're on a set, you do a take, and there's a tremendous activity. Everybody's scooting over here to get their coffee, to do this, to do that. An actor and, a rag dog puppet, basically. When I took the picture, obviously knowing that CWI was going to do the effects, Mel was never in question of that, which was great.
Fortunately, Chris and this whole team really had their act together. It wasn't just a team, they were an ensemble. They were like a troupe of actors, because each person, from John and Stefan down, were artists, and they were used to becoming the characters that they were puppeting.
I then had to come up with a configuration in my mind for the crew to make sure that they would be able to basically handle the picture as if I wasn't the director, as if they were handling the picture with a director. And I picked a longtime friend and very experienced effects man, John Berg, to sort of head up the effects end of it, all the puppeteering and whatever incidental cocoons and all that hard stuff.
Action one. Hold the arms down. Sticks down.
Stefan, as a natural, to do the makeup.
I think Stefan and all those guys did an amazing job, and it helped the movie, it helped the character.
The design phase was probably the most difficult, because I had a lot of very creative, very talented people working at CWI at the time. And I really wanted to give them the chance to come up with something on their own, to define something on their own. I basically said, I want this monster, I want 4 arms on the thing, and I want this many stages in the makeup, and they came up with a bunch of designs, a bunch of widely varied designs. What wound up being the case in the design phase was my getting shots and video of maquettes and design work, and saying, no, do a little more of this, do a little more of that. And I did 1/2 of one very small little head for Stefan. I said, it's sort of something along these lines. And Stefan's a genius, and he just kind of went, okay. Came up with a series of heads right away for the design stage. I said, good.
Anytime you're ready, and action.
Hold it. You wouldn't believe what I'm looking at here, sir.
The monster itself was as much of a challenge as Fly 1, because, in fact, more of a challenge, because in Fly 1 we had what we called the space bug at the end, what he finally turns into. Once he's not Jeff Goldblum anymore, he's a rubber puppet. He's a rubber puppet, fortunately, for a fairly short amount of time. But we still had to emotionally connect to that puppet. Well, here in Fly 2, we had to emotionally connect to a puppet for a much greater period of time and on a different level. We didn't have as much of the sympathy that was guaranteed by that point in Fly 1. It was key to come up with something that wasn't too much of a bug, too weirdly alien that it was unrelatable. It had to have enough of a face in terms of eyes and a mouth that you can relate to it immediately and somehow look into its soul, if I can get away with saying that. From there, it was a matter of breaking down the script into what we're going to need here, what we're going to need there, what specific puppets are we going to need. There were a couple of main puppets. One was a sort of over-the-head puppet, which actually sat, it was sort of the bug's pelvis sat on somebody's shoulders. And so the puppet's way up here, and its arms are out here with rods, and there were obviously more mechanical close-up versions, a couple of full versions, the leaper puppet, all this stuff. He was a main player in the story, so we had to really make sure we were covered. Coloration was the fun part. I wanted to get that metallic look in there, that blue bottle fly look to it, and I think that came across really well. The eyes were, I think they were the only real nightmare part about the puppet effects work, because the eyes are the window of the soul, as they say, and to look in a couple of acrylic hemispheres and find a soul behind it is not necessarily as easy as anyone might think. And so I pushed CWI left, right, and sideways to come up with as many versions of the eyes as possible, which they did, and they were diligent in their efforts. At first it was like, oh yeah, give me something wild and different, but I still want to, see if we can relate to it. And then it was like, no, I think we need something. I think we even tried something that looked pretty human at one point. I think the sort of rust-colored ones I picked because they had a natural warmth to them. And also it worked as a contrast to the blue of the rest of the bug and stuff, so it accented the eyes a little bit more. You've got to get it right with puppets, or they fall apart visually. You spot the seams pretty quick. The whole Cocoon issue was pretty interesting. Again, we came up with a couple of different designs, and I just kind of went, I don't want to be that exacting. I want to get something that's a little, it's a sci-fi horror movie. We need to get something new and a little different looking there. And I wanted to sort of forecast the iridescence as well. The half of it was used in the scene where Eric is changing in the hotel room. And it's a challenging makeup. It's quite, obviously you can see, it's all-encompassing. And also he was locked down on that couch for the entire time we shot. The great thing about Eric is he knew what was involved. He knew that, he was there to get this done. The sooner he got it done, the sooner he could get out of the makeup and get up off the couch. He was brilliant. He was great. He was fantastic. In fact, he was actually, I think he was at his best when he was in makeup or dealing with the puppets and things like that.
And the interesting thing is his character physically metamorphed the way that his makeup did. So I think it helped him tremendously as an actor to have all this on him, and the fact that it just didn't happen instantly also was beneficial. And Eric was scary. I don't think anybody wanted to get near him when he was made up like this. So it worked on and off screen.
About the telepods, you must tell me what the magic word is.
The Bartok Beast was pretty interesting because it had to function for a couple of different things. The end sequence out of the telepod, where it pops loose, had to work so it was connected with Eric and still seem like it could be a separate character so that it could survive for this last scene. And the last scene just had to be this horrible, horrible existence. And one of the missing scenes is the hamburger stand scene. And this was just a fun scene. This was just one of those sort of breaks in the what had by that point in the story had become a pretty dark moment or level, direction it was going. And Mike Bolton's in it. He's actually the guy who's the coach.
What the hell have you idiots done now?
And in fact, there's a lot of the crew in this movie. We shot. It was a location that was way the heck out in the middle of nowhere. I think it was the furthest of the locations we shot, and it was just supposed to be this thing of Martin just getting fed up with his condition, what everything else was going on. These kids tormenting him. in typical kid fashion, and then, you know, that the same thing everybody wants to do when kids push him too far, which is just shock the heck out of him, and which is what he did. Unfortunately, I had an editor who really knew what he was doing, because he told me even before we shot it, he said, "It's not going to be in the movie." I said, "It's going to be in the movie. It's a great little scene."
And cue.
No, cut.
I said, "Oh, come on, I got to shoot this scene. I got to see this scene." And so we shot it, and he put it together, and it worked, and it did everything he said it would do. It stopped the flow. I said, "Fine, you win."
Give me 6 Bolton burgers, 6 Pepsis, and 6 fries, please.
The houseboat scene was a scene that was inflicted upon us by the studio. They wanted a happy ending, and I don't think they got the dynamics of the payback. And I just kept telling them, I said, "This picture ends on the fly. It ends on the Bartok beast getting his. Nobody cares about anything after that. That finishes the drama." And they said, "Well, we want to know that they're happy and they're together and everything else." And I hated the concept of the shot, of the scene.
That was a quick
I did shoot it so that it could be used in an absolute emergency, but I really, 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 really did not want that scene in the film. We had it on a test screening up in the Bay Area, and it was like one of the biggest notes from everybody in the audience was, "Get rid of the houseboat scene." And it was great. You know, the same executive who had really insisted on it came back and said, "Chris, absolutely right about it. It's out." Which was great. We edited in Marin County in town of Ross, in a great little storefront we rented.
We'd taken over some offices in this quaint, bucolic little town of Ross, kind of like Peyton Place, but I don't know what the intrigues were in that town, but it was a great place to work. It had nothing to do with the movie business, and it was nice to edit, go out to lunch, and not see Hollywood people.
It was great. Sean Barton, interesting story about Sean Barton. Was that he was suggested to me by one of the vice presidents in charge of the production, and who he had worked with previously. And I kind of went, I really don't want to choose anybody that any of the executives have worked with before. And I said, "Oh well, you know, I'll give him good consideration." And sort of blew him off. And then I think I met him. Somebody else brought him up and said, "Yeah, he's pretty good." I think it was probably Stephen Charles Jaffe, actually. And he said, "Well, let's just meet him." And I said, "Okay." Well, we met him. We met him down in Santa Monica at some bar, and he was there in a suit and little pork pie hat, and he's just always a mischievous devil, he is. And we just got on right away. He was a real hit. I said, "Great, he's going to work great." And then next time I was back up at CWI, I was with some of the crew, and I said, "So yeah, and we got this guy, and we got this guy, and then I got an editor, Sean Barton," and one of the guys goes, "Who?" Sean Barton. He's an English guy. And he goes, "He's my uncle." So, and I'm like, "Oh, really?" So it was turned into a family affair, and they're both in the film actually in the shot. So, Sean was great. He was wonderful. I actually had not had much experience with post-production in general. He was great because he was on top of the film from the word go. He was cutting in Vancouver while we were shooting. He was showing me stuff along the way. He was showing me alternatives. He was saying, "This is what's happening now with the flow here. Do you want it to lighten here? You want it darken?" He was giving me my options as I was going.
Having Sean there, having him edit at the speed he did was utterly helpful. You know, now you can pre-visualize things with, you know, animated storyboard programs, things like that. We didn't have that, so we had storyboards, but you know, just to be able to have the editor so close by and be so responsive was great.
I think what drew me to using Chris was watching Hellraiser for Robin Vigil's work, and I kind of went, "That's the big kind of monster score I want," you know. That's so then I listened to some other stuff of his, like, you know, this guy's got the right stuff.
And then talked to Mel about it and said we want to hire Chris Young, and he said great, and we did.
I remember so vividly that when Chris decided to hire me, what a magnificent rush of thrilled energy that came over me, because it was a film that I really, really wanted to do. I went in and started on the project and thought maybe, just maybe, he's going to want me to write in that same style. And then I was going to have to sort of score this in the shadow of Howard. The wonderful thing that Chris did is he said, forget it. As I recall, it's not that he was saying wasn't a good score for that movie. He says, I don't want that score for my movie. I want you to do your score for my movie.
He's a real interesting composer to work with, because he, at that point, wasn't the best piano player in the world. You know, now with all the electronic support, you know, you go and composers got the entire symphonic score ready for you just to listen to on your first visit. Way back then in those days, you know, it was Chris and a piano, and he gives quite a performance. Because he'll play and he'll just, and he's cursing himself the whole time, and then it's this, and he's humming, and and it's just like this wonderful blur of a character kind of going. But you get it. You really get what music he's bringing to it. And it was great.
So Chris must have had a great imagination, because not only did he not come over every day because he was up north, not only did he not hear it with an orchestra, just me bashing away on the piano, but I don't think he came down that much. You know, I can't really recall, but my suspicion is just because of the distance, he wasn't able to visit me as often as guys who lived down the block would have been. So there was a lot of faith that was required.
I think there were two times I did not agree with what he was doing, and one was the music he initially came up with for young Martin in the Ductwork, where a really popular score for years afterwards for temp tracking a lot of pictures. I'd be going to these screenings going, hey, that's my music. You stole my music. It was an interesting picture for me because it was such other than a mind-blurring, draining experience along the way, it was extremely positive, and then it was sort of turn it over to the studio.
Marketing to me is the worst part about making movies. I really hate it because you can kill a movie in 10 minutes in a marketing meeting.
And I remember Stephen Charles and Jaffe and I going in for the marketing meeting, and walking in with the head of marketing, actually, and we both said the same thing, which is we don't care what it is, as long as it's not like Father, Like Son. Sure enough, they had the poster like Father, Like Son.
The Fly 2, Like Father, Like Son.
It's a great idea to let the filmmakers have their own private test screening so they can not have to face a firing squad on a cold screening where no one has exposed the movie to an audience, and you see what it is, good, bad, or indifferent. And the fact that Mel allowed us to have our own private test screening before the usual marketing one with studio executives was very helpful to us, because we made a number of changes based on the reactions to that screening.
The picture was made as a date movie. It's made for teenagers, and that was the audience. They went for it. They loved it. The houseboat scene was out. It was great to see the audience reaction. The biggest reaction was actually the head getting crushed in the elevator, which was gigantic reaction, which was an interesting part of the post-production, because we got an X rating twice for that scene. I figured because there's others, the guy getting his face eaten off a few minutes earlier or whatever, and here it is. It's a quick cut of this guy getting his head chopped off, and we get an X for it. So we went back to them and recut it a little bit and got another X. And I said, I can't cut this out. I mean, this is the real shock of the picture. It is the most unexpected moment I've got. And the thing was, it was too shocking to them. I think the line was that it was too much like an industrial accident. And I said, well, it's a monster movie. It's a horror movie. It's supposed to be shocking. We got to surprise people. And they said, but it's too shocking and it's too surprising. It's too sudden. So in the end, what it wound up being was another cut of, I think it's Hargis's character and another cut of him looking up at the elevator coming down. We just lengthened the prologue to the shot, and they said fine. No, you know what? I don't think it was in the script because I don't think we had an elevator in the pod lab in the script. That elevator was actually put on the set for the construction of the set. And I told Mike, I said, we're keeping that elevator. We are keeping the elevator. He's going, well, it's not, we're not supposed to put people in it. It's just for supplies and stuff. We're keeping the elevator. It's not going anywhere. And so I suspect that may have come up of just, being up there and coming up with that on site. Did pretty well. Like, you know what? The funny thing is, I didn't actually follow the film that much after it was out. It was it opened pretty good. It was like 11 something the first weekend. At that time, it was pretty good, and then it played pretty well. It did well on video, and it was a big hit in Europe. In fact, I heard from a distributor over there that it saved a German theater chain because it was having a terrible, terrible year. There was nothing was bringing them in, and then Fly 2 opened up, and suddenly they were, everything was rosy again. So the Vincent Price films had a magic all their own. They had a lot of that 50s monster mentality to them. That's the kind of thing that I was brought up on, the kind of thing I knew that I could deliver, and the kind of thing I wanted to do.
This is the work of a madman.
I did definitely pursue much more of that mentality to it. I love the Vincent Price movies. I love all Vincent Price movies. It was one of the things that I didn't like about doing the first Fly, or before we went into it, was that I thought they shouldn't be touched because the first Fly, was its own thing. It was its own unique kind of film within the genre. And to remake it, I didn't see what new technology and the rest of it was really going to do for it until I read David's script, and I was just like, okay, we love that. I think that's the most disappointing thing to me as far as this film goes, in that when Cronenberg did The Fly, as far as I was concerned, he opened up a whole new avenue of science fiction, and it had such intelligence, such emotion and humanity to it. I just was absolutely in love with it. I wanted to do something that would not embarrass that one too much up front. And that's why Stuart Kornfeld and I were really working hard at coming up with very different films, but films that were still of the same intelligence and artistry as Cronenberg's.
But now the dream is over, and the insect is awake.
For me, Fly 2 was a great learning experience. It was my first feature. It was a great experience. There were very trying times. There were very exhausting times, but I had the support of a great many very qualified, good-hearted people, and that just made it magic. There were things about it that I'd changed. There were things about it I wish I hadn't done. There were fights I wish I'd fought a little harder with the studio, but overall, it was a great experience. I'm glad I did it. I hope the film is watchable, and I hope people can take it in the framework that it was meant to be. It's a monster movie.